The narrow road leading to Blackwood Hollow twisted through the dense forest like a serpent, its asphalt cracked and overgrown with weeds. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that stretched across the road like the grasping fingers of unseen hands. Amber and Jake drove in silence, their car the only sound in the stillness of the evening. "I can't believe we finally own a house," Amber said, breaking the quiet, her voice tinged with both excitement and disbelief. Jake glanced at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yeah, it's a bit of a fixer-upper, but it's ours. And it was a steal." Amber nodded, her eyes on the dense trees that bordered the road. The real estate agent's words echoed in her mind. The property has a bit of a history, but nothing to worry about. Just some old tales from the locals. She had dismissed it at the time, more focused on the prospect of owning their first home than on the cryptic warning. Now, as they drew closer to Blackwood Hollow, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in her stomach. The house appeared as they rounded the final bend, a looming silhouette against the darkening sky. It was a Victorian-era mansion, its once grand facade now faded and crumbling with age. Tall windows lined the front, their glass panes fogged and dirty, obscuring the view inside. The front door, an imposing structure of dark oak, hung slightly ajar as if waiting for them. Jake parked the car, and they stepped out onto the gravel driveway. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, the sound of leaves rustling in the wind the only accompaniment to their footsteps. As they approached the front door, Amber hesitated, her gaze drawn to the second-floor window where she thought she saw a shadow move. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "See what?" Jake replied, turning to look where she pointed. Amber shook her head, forcing a smile. "Never mind, it's probably just the wind." Jake pushed open the front door, and they stepped inside. The air was cool and musty, carrying the scent of old wood and damp stone. The entrance hall was wide, with a grand staircase leading to the upper floors. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs clung to the corners like the remnants of forgotten memories. "Welcome home," Jake said, his voice echoing in the empty space. Amber looked around, trying to imagine the house as it might have been in its prime, elegant and full of life. But all she could see were the shadows lurking in the corners, the silence that seemed to press in on them from all sides. They spent the next few hours unloading their belongings and setting up the basics. By the time they finished, night had fallen, and the house was shrouded in darkness. They decided to sleep in the living room on the first floor, where they'd set up an air mattress and a few blankets. Amber lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the distant hoot of an owl. She closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing thoughts, but sleep eluded her. Just as she was about to drift off, she heard it, a soft whisper, so faint she almost thought she imagined it. "Amber." Her eyes snapped open, her heart pounding. She sat up, glancing around the dark room, but there was no one there. Jake was sound asleep beside her, his breathing slow and even. "Amber." The voice came again, closer this time. She turned towards the doorway, her breath catching in her throat. A shadow stood in the hallway, barely visible in the darkness. It was tall and thin, its features obscured, but she could feel its gaze on her. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The shadow didn't move, but the whisper came again, more insistent. "Amber." She reached out to shake Jake awake. But before she could, the shadow vanished, dissolving into the darkness like smoke. The whisper faded, leaving only the silence behind. Amber sat there, her heart racing, unable to shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. But when she finally woke Jake and told him what she had seen, he brushed it off as a dream brought on by exhaustion. "Get some sleep," he said, pulling her close. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you." Amber nodded, but as she lay back down, she couldn't help but feel that something was watching her from the shadows, waiting. Chapter 2, The Secrets of Blackwood Hollow. The following days were filled with work as Amber and Jake began cleaning and repairing the old house. They scrubbed years of grime from the walls, patched holes in the roof, and replaced broken windows. But no matter how much they cleaned or fixed, the house retained an air of neglect, as if it resisted their efforts to bring it back to life. Amber couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She would often catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of her eye, only to find nothing there when she turned to look. She heard strange noises at night, whispers, footsteps, the sound of something scratching at the walls, but every time she investigated, she found nothing. Jake dismissed her concerns, chalking it up to the house's age and the stress of the move. But Amber couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease that gnawed at her. One afternoon, while exploring the house, Amber discovered a small door in the back of a closet. It was hidden behind a row of old coats and dresses, its wooden surface scratched and worn. She opened it cautiously, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. "Jake," she called, her voice echoing down the stairs. Jake appeared a moment later, wiping his hands on a rag. "What is it?" "I found this," Amber said, pointing to the hidden door. "I think it leads to the basement." Jake peered down the stairs, his brow furrowing. "I didn't know there was a basement." "Neither did I." They exchanged a glance before Jake grabbed a flashlight and started down the stairs. Amber followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with the scent of mold and decay. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, revealing rows of old wooden shelves lined with dusty jars and boxes. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, swaying gently in the breeze that drifted through the room. At the far end of the basement, they found a large, rusted door. Jake pushed it open with some effort, revealing a small room beyond. Inside, they found an old desk, its surface covered in yellowed papers and a thick layer of dust. A single candle sat in the center of the desk, its wax melted into a pool around the base. "What is this place?" Amber asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake picked up one of the papers, squinting at the faded writing. "Looks like some kind of journal," he said, flipping through the pages. "It's dated over 100 years ago." Amber leaned over his shoulder, reading the words scrawled in the journal's margins. They were written in a shaky hand, the letters uneven and slanted. The entries spoke of strange occurrences in the house, objects moving on their own, disembodied voices, shadows that crept through the halls at night. As they read, a sense of dread settled over them. The journal's author, a man named Edward Blackwood, described the slow descent of his wife, Eliza, into madness. She claimed to hear voices in the walls, to see figures watching her from the shadows. Edward dismissed her fears at first, but as time went on, he began to experience the same phenomena. The final entries were desperate, filled with pleas for help and warnings to anyone who might find the journal. "We need to leave," Amber said, her voice trembling. Jake looked at her, his expression grim. "We can't. We've put everything into this place." Amber shook her head, backing away from the desk. "I don't care. Something's wrong with this house, Jake. We need to get out of here." Jake hesitated, torn between the practicalities of their situation and the fear that had taken root in his heart. Before he could respond, a loud crash echoed through the basement, the sound of something heavy falling to the floor. They both jumped, spinning around to face the source of the noise. The flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows across the walls. For a moment, they stood frozen, listening to the silence that followed. Then, slowly, they heard it, a faint whisper, rising from the darkness. "Amber." Amber's blood ran cold as the whisper grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to come from all around them, filling the air with a sound that was both pleading and malevolent. "Amber, help me." Without thinking, Amber grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him towards the stairs. They ran, the flashlight bobbing wildly in Jake's hand as they fled the basement. The whispers followed them, growing louder and more frantic with each step. They burst into the hallway, slamming the basement door behind them. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving them in a suffocating silence. Chapter 3, Unraveling the past. After their terrifying encounter in the basement, Amber and Jake became increasingly desperate to understand the history.